And we are live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Legislative Review Committee. Today is Thursday, April 4th, 2024, and we are in City Hall 301B. And we are going to start the meeting today with approval of the minutes from March 7th, and we are going to reapprove for the records the minutes from Thursday, February 1st as well. Could I have a motion?
Move to approve the minutes of March 7th, reaffirm the approval of the minutes of February 1st.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved. Okay, we have no public input. We see no public in here to give any public input, so we are moving on to C. The commission identified items of interest, and I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Manager Nikki Jones to give us an intro to where we are in revising the ACC smoking ordinance.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. In May of 2023, the LRC had its very first review of the indoor smoking ordinance. At that time, the American Heart Association came and made a presentation at that meeting. Ultimately, the LRC recommended and the Mayor and Commission approved the amendment of the indoor smoking ordinance, which included vaping products. Subsequently, it's been put back into committee. And in January, the Attorney's Office wanted to raise an important legal concern for the LRC's consideration. The American Heart Association proposed a draft, and I'll let the Attorney's Office speak to it, but the draft proposes to expand state law and be more restrictive, specifically including banning smoking in private clubs, hotels, restaurants, bars, etc. It's important to note that while state law does allow local jurisdictions to pass local ordinances regarding smoking that are more restrictive to the state law, it does indicate that they can only do so if they are not in direct conflict with a very specific chapter. And I will not go into that. I will allow the Attorney's Office to do so. But specifically, the draft that they provided to us would attempt to override the exemptions listed in this very specific chapter. Thereby, it would be very challenging for us to argue that the draft is not in direct conflict with state law. But Attorney Hines, I don't want to go any further and speak like an attorney, so I would allow Attorney Hines to speak on this issue. However, at this point, do we need to have any questions raised before we jump into this?
Yes,
I have a question.
Right.
Write down fast enough. Did you have in your summary the date of what we have already moved out of LRC that got voted on? What was the date that we?
I'm sorry.
Because this is like round two. What time did we get just capture either when it came out of here or when we voted to accept that?
I think we voted to accept it in
The full.
In May,
Because I wrote May 2023 down when you were talking and.
Yep,
then
that's when it
that
first
was-
came in.
Because I have it assigned as October, so October 3 assignment is for this round two.
For 2024.
Well, this, on here it says mayor assigned to LRC on October 3rd,
Yes, 2023. Correct.
2023.
Yes.
The
So-
second version, because if it's May.
The
it's
second
right-
version,
right,
that's
okay,
correct.
So this is number two
And the first version came out, I'm not sure.
and already got voted maybe in May.
More
huge.
than likely it
Yes.
came out in May.
And then would have gone through the other cycles.
Correct.
Okay.
So I
Alright,
have an email if it helps where I was drafting the changes that were approved at the LRC May 2023 meeting, and then it didn't go to the full commission, I think, until maybe July.
Okay, that helps me. Thanks. I'm just trying to. That's all I had, Chair. Let's get started. Thank you, man.
All right, back to, I believe we're,
Do we have any specific questions that we might want to pose before we go into what the American Heart Association actually had suggested? They noted, it might be important to note this, at our last meeting that we had, I don't think it was the February meeting, I think it was the January meeting, that in order for us to be designated as a smoke-free city, we would have to remove the exemption number 5, and that's smoking areas designated by employer or banquet or meeting rooms. Do we want to talk about that specifically, or do we want to have a more holistic conversation about indoor smoking?
This is a lot for just a short group or short attended group, so I'm not sure how much we're gonna be covering.
Well-
I kind of want to have more time to absorb this and bring it up when we have full staff, full committee, but
Well, I think that if this document, for me, looking through it before, there's a lot of places in here where it says conflicts in the analysis column, like it all sunk in. And of course, the manager's office got me the nice printouts that match out with the American Heart Association suggestion. But there are a couple of places where it says probably conflicts or complies. So, and there really aren't that many in it. So I'd like to sort of like look at what you say here, which this one sheeter that only applies to the indoor smoking in workrooms. And then perhaps just address those couple of places where it's like this complies and would it be worth changing or not? I don't think it's actually, if there are more pages than it looks like.
all right, you're talking about moving to a discussion that talks about the partially conflict topics. in
Right.
This thicker one.
Yeah, and they may be
After-
very
After we
short.
look at the one sheet.
Yes.
Okay. Oh,
Mr. Gould, is that okay with you? We can come back afterwards. Let's proceed here and then we can see, I'm sure there's an opportunity for more questions and input.
So am I understanding that what you want to do right now is just go through the complies or potentially, sort of complies or potential conflicts portion? Is that?
Let's look through the one that focuses on the one area where in terms of workroom, and then the second
Sure.
thing, look at the comply or the partially things, which aren't that many.
Okay.
Cities.
And Courtney's done a great deal of work on this as well, so certainly feel free to chime in anytime you'd like, Courtney. But I think the short answer is that when we heard the presentation from Ms. Brachi from the American Heart Association, the last meeting, that they basically told us that we need to remove this one exemption 5. Now, the strange thing about that conversation is that the whole presentation was focused on the idea that we just need to remove this exemption that allows for internal smoking employee break rooms. Our subsection 5 is broader than that, and so it actually combines 2 exemptions that are listed in the state law. So it's not just employee break rooms, but it's also banquet rooms being used in private events, I believe, where there's nobody under the age of 18. So I think one question for the LRC is, if you wanted to proceed with the American Heart Association proposal, do you want to remove everything of that subsection 5 that's currently in our code? Or would you only want to remove the references to employee break rooms and leave the references to allow smoking in banquet or meeting rooms once such rooms are being used for private functions that meet various requirements that are currently outlined? Because that's not something the American Heart Association.
Can I just get the number right? Because the one-page handout that you delve into more references 433 and 434, no 45. So which, I just want to
Oh, no.
make sure,
Yes,
is it 433 or is it 435? But this,
Exemptions, right?
yes, and it's possible that we may have missed that, and I apologize if we did. Courtney can certainly speak to that too. But 435A5 is, I believe, what they wanted us to change. Courtney, do you have any other thoughts?
No, I think that's,
And it may be, we just may not have pulled out all of the relevant parts of our
okay.
larger, book, as we said. on
yeah, I
this.
think in the abridged version, it makes reference to 433, which is, I think, the definition section. Is that right? I don't have the full thing.
That would make sense. And I
No,
apologize for the
that's-
complexity of
That's
this.
regulation of public smoking in public spaces, 433. And then there's 434, which is regulation of smoking in places of employment, and 435, which is exemptions.
So we probably, to best satisfy what the American Heart Association wants to do, we would need to make changes in probably all of these things. Or at least add some clarity, but the primary ask from them was to remove that 435A5 exception. And again, they just didn't really speak to the private meeting room piece. So apologize for any confusion there. And it is pretty, I mean, there are a lot of restrictions there, but again, it's entirely up to you as to how you choose to proceed.
So is your question then, if we're looking on page 435, where it says the exemptions, and we go to 5 and it says smoking areas designated by employer, or banquet or meeting rooms when such rooms are being used for private functions which don't meet the following, what does it mention?
Yeah, so it says designated by an employer. And then, or the banquet or meeting rooms, and so then subsection C speaks to the smoking area shall be for use of employees only.
So the question kind of is also whether or not, if we just address the employer part, will that meet the requirements to get on there? Like, so that needs to be clarified with the Heart Association if we want to be deemed a smokes, like that, just that question whether we need to go further.
Right.
A smoke-free city, is it everything there or not? Okay, that makes sense.
Or put another way, would they still designate Athens-Clarke County as a smoke-free city if we had an exemption for banquet or meeting
Meeting
rooms?
rooms, right.
when Such rooms are being used for private functions.
Right. So we need that clarification for that minimal change that would meet their satisfaction.
Yes.
Okay.
And I provided some confidential legal documents, in terms of our response to the presentations. I prefer not to delve into that,
Okay.
any more than necessary, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions or, assist in any changes that you all want to make.
Sherry, can you say what you just said again? Could we be a smoke-free city if we?
If we change basically that exemption 5.
Exemption 5.
Such that it says that smoking areas in banquet or meeting rooms that are designated, sorry, I didn't say it right. If we change that subsection to exempt smoking areas in banquet or meeting rooms when such rooms are being used for private functions.
Okay, so we, to understand that, yeah, because what they gave us includes those, it does include what they gave us originally before that, explanation 2 months ago, where they looked at, here's the bare minimum, mentions also limiting common work areas, conferences, private offices, meeting rooms, like you were saying in here, yeah.
That's right.
So just, we need a clarification on that.
Changing that from smoking and banquet or private functions.
Or perhaps breaking those two, like you could leave, you could take out the employee, like just get rid of the employee workroom reference on that one, and that would meet it. So that's, makes sense to me, and I can, or we can, staff can follow up with the Heart Association on that. Are there any, does Commissioner Hool, you look like you're thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, if I read through what all these other cities have done, I mean, they've all done things somewhat differently. But, to answer the question about employee designated smoke rooms, I mean, so many places aren't exempting, so it seems like an obvious thing that we should just move forward on adding to ours. I appreciate the attorney's office doing a very diligent job of analyzing how what the Heart Association is proposing compares to, a strict reading of state law. But in practice, I mean, we see so many localities being more restrictive than state law that I don't feel like we'd be alone in trying to go further, trying to be closer to the Heart Association. I mean, some of it might not have too much practical application. For example, the hotels exemption. I mean, we've not really got hotels doing that anyway. But especially since we don't have hotels doing that anyway, and there's plenty of other cities that also aren't exempting them, it seems like why not put that on the list, for example. So, I'd feel more comfortable moving forward with more of what the Heart Association is encouraging us to remove from our exemptions. If I'm looking at Unicode right now, 435, it seems obvious that we should leave private residences as a place that it's allowed. I'd suggest removing 2, which is hotel motel rooms, leaving 3, which is the retail tobacco stores. and then removing 4 and 5. And then, my thought is this kind of distinction about the banquet hall, private, party room thing could just be attached under 6 insofar as we think that we need more than, 6 is private clubs. So if we wanted to add, a room designated for private use by a private club, or whatever we want to say, that achieves that special thing, but, especially when we're in it seems unlikely that we'd face any litigation right now from any current hotel or motel, so why not just remove that while we can, when it's unlikely to be challenged, and we've seen plenty of other cities do it. The other thing I'm curious about, and I think I brought this up at some past meeting, might have been the one with the audio was out, but, outdoor festival areas is something that I also am wondering if we should be looking at. If we look at 4.3, 4.3.2 and 4.3.3, which is prohibited in Athens-Clarke County facilities and public spaces, it's not clear to me that something like the festival zones where we close down streets and people hang out, whether it is or is not prohibited. I feel like we would do well to be explicit about prohibiting that as well. So, we've talked a lot here about festival zone definitions. Maybe if there's a way to just add any area designated as a festival zone to 4.3.2, that would, because I'm thinking about all the performers, a lot of times you have youth performers even, kids from Camp Amped or whatever playing at these shows, and we don't need people smoking right in front of the stage, so. So those are my thoughts.
Mr. Wright, any thoughts?
Gaining a smoke-free city status is not a big priority for me.
Okay.
So, it seems like a lot. We've got time and effort explaining it, working through it. We've got enforcement things that seem very complicated, and penalties seem very complicated.
Well,
So
yeah,
it's
it's
not
not
a
right
priority.
for going to the details. I think considering that we have just the minimum quorum here today, and that we wouldn't be voting on it today anyway, that we don't need to spend an inordinate amount of time on this. I think the question, like Commissioner Wright is bringing up, do we want to do anything? Do we just want to do the minimum and do the meeting rooms? Or what Commissioner Hool is mentioning, some other areas, and perhaps we could have that succinctly, like if we were gonna do it to get the meeting rooms. After we find this question from the Heart Association, so we don't spend time working on the meeting rooms the workrooms, and then they say, what about this other part? But let's say, assume it's just the employee workrooms, then what is the language? It seems to me like that would be pretty simple language to include. And I don't know if that would take you more than very long to do that kind of wording. I'd like to suggest that maybe once we get that answer from Laura Brockian, it's just the employee workrooms. And if that does not take much time on your part, to bring some suggested language for that, and we could have that language the next time, then that would be easy to say to the group, do we want to vote on this? Do we want a motion to not vote on it at all and pass it out? Perhaps Commissioner Poole could then talk to others, put their ideas forth. Clearly, if there's not a majority, there's no need to spend an inordinate amount of time on that. How does that sound as a plan?
That sounds good to me, and also I appreciate that this is also going to the GOC commissioners too. So those are wanting to see what we're working on, and
Oh, you mean the
The
topic?
copy. Yeah,
Yeah, not that this is going to the topic. but the
no,
information.
we never switch assignments. Come on now.
yeah.
No, they've got plenty on their plate, but that sounds good as far as having those sort of 3
Yeah.
points, and I think that, moving to the next topic is also relevant from the first thing you covered and wanted to check up with.
Right.
Parts. I think that also
Right.
lends well to moving on to the next topic.
So I will just verify again with Laura Brockie on this, as soon as I can, so we can make a decision on this.
I think that would be feasible for the next meeting.
Okay, great.
And then, if there's feedback on some of these listed ones for her, like cross-referencing. If they have, if that status is something that we want to go for, how does smoke-free city look with these categories? That's
With
I'll
you,
talk- I'll talk
okay,
to
you
you
follow
I'll-
up.
yeah, I'll
Right,
talk.
afterwards, okay.
If you're gonna reach out to her, I've got something else that you might be able to ask her.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right. Shall we move on then?
Sounds good.
But, well, so is the only thing that's happening between now and next meeting is communicating with Laura Rocky about whether we get that status still and then come back and have the same.
No, I actually said to the attorneys here that seems like addressing that from language wise, that they could bring something forth on that. Because it doesn't sound to me like that would take much time. Then if that is something we want to move forward on, we'd have something to vote on immediately. If there are other people who are interested in adding more, we'd then be able to do that afterwards. We could have a discussion of that.
Can we, does it seem feasible to also bring forth language that would add something like the festival zones to the public spaces? Is that an
I
option?
think that's broadening this when we aren't even clear that this is a priority to do within building. My opinion.
So let's just leave that out of here for now and deal with this, because I think if that, perhaps you could, we could evaluate whether or not that's just a simple, you could bring it forth as just a simple addition to the public spaces.
Well, I guess I'm just thinking, having something in writing for us to discuss, and then hopefully we can walk away from that meeting with either a recommendation to the full mayor and commission of passing without action, or a recommendation to include whatever the provisions are, instead of having to drag this out over 2 more meetings. We can just have a draft with that. Okay.
Well, I think it's good to have a majority when we're directing staff time on an idea.
Well, I guess so we're in disagreement. Do you have a thought one way or another on this?
Well, if it's, perhaps I would say, that is referring to, that would be the public 432, is that 432 for smoking prohibited in Athens-Clarke County facilities or in public places? Because smoking shall be prohibited in enclosed public spaces.
So it says 432, smoking shall be prohibited within the boundaries of any park, youth sports complex, or recreation area owned, leased, or operated by the unified government of Athens-Clarke County, including any open area within such park, youth sports complex, or open area. So all I'm asking is for the attorneys to weigh in on whether festival zones are already under that definition. I'm assuming they aren't. And if they aren't, can we add festival zones to that?
Is that an easy, quick question that you can respond to now, or?
So I think I would need to research it just to be sure there isn't a legal issue that I am not considering. I think, and I would defer to the manager's office, but I think the primary challenge would be enforcement in the
Right.
festival zone. Assuming that there's no legal issue with the prohibition, because we are talking about public streets, which are, traditional public forums, so we always want to be careful when you're regulating on that kind of property.
Yeah, and I also think if I look back to this charge here, in terms of, it was a charge to use the recommendations from the American Heart Association. Oh, it does say as a model, doesn't it? As a model there, so, let me follow up and see if there's how much time, or if there's any time involved, like if this is an easy thing. If it's anything complicated, I think that we need to not spend much time on it. So I don't
I
know.
mean, for what it's worth, the American Heart Association has a very extensive definition here that they borrowed from Gainesville that says shall be prohibited in all, spaces. So I mean,
Oh, in the,
Can I clarify, that they actually, I think, prepared this draft for Gainesville. Gainesville didn't adopt this. There were just references to Gainesville that were left over.
Okay.
I mean, that's a useful distinction, I guess, but if this is I guess I'm saying if this is the draft that they gave us and that's the model we're supposed to be working off of, we're obviously only using a tiny portion of that for the discussion right now. I'm asking to introduce this. I think this is a concept that aligns with what they were generally trying to get at, but.
And I think what we're asking here is, let's just have you discuss it amongst yourselves, bring it back to the larger group with just discussion without research about where it would go, and have the larger group decide on this, so we can do that together.
It would be a snapshot, again, on legally being able to say that you can't smoke out in the city streets, College Square, something in festival zones. It could be, how would that be enforced?
Right,
How
right.
could you,
Well,
we don't need the police putting people's smokes out.
You could say the same thing about how do we enforce it right now in Bishop Park,
I know.
the other part,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so the enforcement question to me is a moot point about whether to include this or not, because it's at least as much of a problem in all of the other outdoor spaces that we already restricted from. And actually, festival zones have a much higher police presence than our parks do on any given day. I mean, they're full of police all over the place, so I guess I don't understand why that would preclude us from doing.
If I could offer one point here that when we were talking about festival zones, I believe when the police department was here, part of the intent, certainly not the full intent, but part of the intent was to reduce the amount of enforcement that the police department was trying to, or what they were responsible for. And that does not preclude us from having this discussion. I just wanted to bring that up because I think that was one.
I'm assuming actually that it's not going to be much of an issue, but probably if we say you can't do it, fewer people will do it because that's the rule. But like calling, whether anyone tries to ask a police officer to come over and enforce their.
Let's do this. Let's add that to the, obviously it's gonna be in the minutes because our minutes are so thorough, and that could bring up a question for the larger group even than this, because right now there's a very small group here. And let's just work on that minimum part, and then that would be decided in terms of should we expand this or not, and do we have the majority, and hopefully we'll have a larger quorum next time, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, let's move on to, we did that pretty quickly, huh? Didn't get to do a little quiet time there. for very
Sorry,
long.
can I bring us back real quick? I'm sorry to ask
Yes.
this question. Does LRC want us to find a way for us to become a smoke-free city? I guess that would be helpful for us, because if that's the goal, certainly work with the attorney's office and to find a way. It might not be a way, but we can certainly try to work to find a way, if that's the intent. But if, you know.
There's only 3 of us here. I would like to be a smoke-free city.
But that might not be the majority.
I'd like to as well, and the decisions get made by the people who show up. I mean, we just approved minutes where one of the people absent has been absent the last 2 meetings as well. So.
Well,
so-
when we schedule meetings, when somebody says they can't be here, we already asked
Yeah,
about this meeting last time we talked about it, and we decided to move forward, even though it was spring break.
yeah. Let's just do that, and we'll find out if we can do that with this minimum change. And I will talk to Laura with the Heart Association.
Yes, because it's a minimum change to a lot of changes that we have yet to just decide is going to,
Yeah,
happen.
all right. Are we good?
Sorry, bringing that back up.
That's good.
All right, I guess the floor is ours here. Thank you for having us today.
Well, Ron, let me
Yes,
kick us off
go
real
ahead.
quick.
Yes, sir.
Just,
Sorry. I was thinking, I was like, okay.
So just as a reminder, we always like to provide a reminder to folks and folks watching. So in May of 2023, the commission asked via a CDO, staff, and then subsequently the LRC to create a policy, 2 separate policies, one publicly funded for neighborhood traffic calming, the other a self-funded traffic calming process. And we've gone through this process, and then we've completed the publicly funded neighborhood calming processes. I think that's the opt-out policy, correct?
Mhm.
So that's the publicly funded process for NTMP, which has subsequently been changed to RTMP, to better align with what we were trying to accomplish. The LRC recommended a data-driven approach, a new set of criteria, and subsequently the Mayor Commission has approved this larger residential traffic management program. So that was the data-driven approach, that's the opt-out policy, and that's the publicly funded policy with legacy lists and all those things. So today we're going to talk about the voluntary portion of that, which is the self-funded traffic calming process. And we have Mr. Contreve, Mr. Griffith here to talk to us about just a high level, conceptual level, what that policy may look like. And that policy may follow some other processes that you're familiar with, i.e. the sidewalk policy.
Correct. Well, thank you for having us here. I'm sorry I jumped ahead.
Oh, you're good.
In a moment, we will share with you, Sarah will share with you the current draft of the policy. This policy, we're calling it the voluntary residential traffic management policy. It is a standalone policy. However, it's complementary to what you all are familiar with and has approved, just like Nikki said. This policy addresses traffic calming requests, privately funded, and traffic management elements that may be added to the right-of-way and later become a part of the right-of-way and part of the roadway and becomes something for us to maintain. So for us to consider life cycles moving forward. This policy in general allows, at least in a formal way, for residents to collaborate and come together and request through a representative of those residents, either in an HOA setting or non-HOA setting. The expectation is that the residents will fund the construction and will also manage the design and the delivery, the construction of these proposed and approved traffic management elements. The qualification for the roadway, this is getting a little bit more technical. This is mirroring the original policy, the locally funded policy. So it only qualifies residential streets, and we give the same definition to residential street as we did for the other policy. So this would not qualify, or these type of measures would not qualify for arterials or collectors. However, we will not be considering, the volume of traffic that's going through in deciding if they qualify or not. However, speed and volume will be looked at to evaluate the measures that to be used and we see suitable for a segment of roadway or a block of a neighborhood. That being said, I'd like to entertain starting reviewing the policy with you, going point by point and highlighting, or talking about any items you would like to change. So I'll open the floor. Nikki, would you like the committee to do that?
Well, the overall intent of the policy and the purpose of this voluntary portion of the policy is what, Ron?
Is to establish a framework for residents to communicate to us, staff, and then we know we do have a frame of work to work with. So a representative from the neighborhood approaches the traffic engineer. The traffic engineer looks at the area in question, provides a list of residents who may be living along the same block of roadway that is in question, may look at some traffic data, history of accidents, things like that. Discussion may happen at that level. And then we would provide this representative a list of those residents and the owners of these properties. To initiate that, we need 65% consent from those residents or homeowners. But to get this moving forward, there's two steps. There's the initial step, and then once we identify cost alongside with this representative, we will need, right now we're saying 100%. these numbers, when you hear 65 or 100,
Mhm.
we would love to hear your feedback on those. This is our staff, kind of like, the first number came to mind. We set it in this policy. This is a draft, so please, this is for discussion, and we would love to hear your feedback.
It looks to me like when we do the cross-outs, we're really just talking about a two-page policy when it, I mean, if you do that, so I just, we've had a lot of big handouts and it looks like it could take forever, but it's really only about 2 pages, so.
It is as long as the homeowners are able to put together a amount of cash to move forward.
Yeah, I'm just talking about for
Yes.
reviewing it.
Oh, yes, yes.
That's all I'm just talking about for
There
right now.
might be
It's just-
more details added to this in case we want to look at a special capital tax district.
Well, let's
Area,
let's
but
just,
we don't wanna go
let's
there.
stay at a high level right now.
Yes.
Because that would be a bit into the
Yeah.
details, which is important. But right now, I just want to make sure that we're orienting everyone appropriately. So, this is for residential streets, not just neighborhoods. It doesn't have to be just for a subdivision. It could be just for one street,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
And so now we're talking about homeowners specifically.
Yes.
That's also a very important point that I think we need to mention. And then, you're right, Ronnie, the number of people along the street who buy into this, because ultimately what we're saying here is that this is a privately funded traffic calming device that we are putting in our right of way. So that's one of the biggest things I
Yeah.
just want to get across, is that we're putting a privately funded traffic calming device in our right of way.
Yeah, and even looking at it, I mean, it's, the bigger things is you have this program initiation with 65%, and does it, we say homeowners, but perhaps we mean property owners? I mean,
Point of discussion.
point of discussion,
Definitely property owners.
yeah, because, there are
We
people.
covered that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jesse, your
Yeah.
hand's up first.
Well, just
I know, I know.
Okay,
Wait,
yeah, sorry.
Carol's
I'm just like,
editing.
no, I'm deep in like thinking about this, yeah.
I mean, I guess in my mind, this had kind of lived as like, let's do what we do with the sidewalk program for this. So could you just maybe clarify for me, like, is that basically what this is, or is this significantly different in certain areas?
It's not significantly different, no. It's the only difference we're talking about. There's only one type of sidewalk that goes on people's
Yeah.
front yard, right? But there's multiple elements that will be considered when picking a traffic calming device. Right now, automatically we think speed tables. But we want to consider and accept the idea of considering other.
And does this put the power of like the final decision on what would go there on TPW staff, not the residents, or?
It definitely gives us power, but also opens up lines of communication. So it's not like a close-ended kind of, no, there's communication. We continue to learn. The industry is definitely bringing a lot of more options out there.
Mhm.
We want something that we're able to maintain, sustainable, and work with our staff who will be maintaining it and in future life cycle. Also, we don't want to take something that may have a 5-year lifespan, then we have to replace it, so that becomes a capital. Unless mayor and commission, are
Right,
good with that. And again, it's new in the industry to use a lot of what they call them pilot materials as permanent solution. It's not really advisable. So staff will always look at that life cycle element of anything proposed in the right of way.
Mr. Ray?
Excellent. This is coming all back to me from us working on this already. So I appreciate it. My one thing, I do agree with the 65% because that matches a previous threshold that we've done. But what I would like to ask about for the feasibility of it, a recent example that I had was for the neighborhood residential parking passes. So as soon as the advocate got the 65%, they quit talking to any more of the residents. So I ended up with a person who got the residential parking pass scenario and didn't even know about it, so the sign went up. Is there a way that we could say 100% informed, but 65% approval at that point to initiate it? So everybody knows it's being talked about, but then the reality is everybody does have to chime in.
You can't just stop at 2/3 of the way through. right?
Well, you can for the acceptance of it, but
Yeah.
it seemed awkward to not even know about it. And, so I'm using that example to tell my neighbor that also we could probably do a better job, make sure everybody knows it's happening, even though the threshold is there.
Right, and that property owner's information wound up on the petition. Someone else put it there, and it's very, we sent
You
that
know
to
who I'm
him
talking about.
today. We sent it to him today so he could see that,
Yeah.
but.
Okay, so that's what happens too, when it's neighbors doing the legwork. You've got to trust the process, and there can be some awkwardness to it as well. I could also see how a street could go forward and they want a roundabout. Well, the people whose front yard gets the roundabout are the no's. So it could be a weighted. There's some complicated things
Yes.
there that then you would say, okay, well, that option's not getting the threshold. What is an option that can get the 100% threshold? So, but that's my feedback initially on this, with the numbers. But I'm at first glance, I'm leaning towards us moving this forward to the full mayor and commission with the strikeouts and not the format tracking. And then have that version go to the full mayor and commission for some more of that vetting that I think examples can help with, that we might not have all those kind of examples.
Thank you, for that, Commissioner Wright. On the neighborhood support and under Part C, before we go to mayor and commission, we are asking for 100% support from all residents who are along that block of roadway that would receive whatever we decided with the representative. So to initiate, we need 65, and we're setting the 100% consent. Now, we may receive 90% consent. One neighborhood do not believe that we should put anything. And we may, I don't know, at that point, if the funding is secured, meaning 90% of the residents are willing to pay, but this resident or property owner that does not want this to happen, and he doesn't want to pay, but they're willing to pay. So what do we do? Should we move forward? Should we not? And I think the policy right now doesn't identify that scenario. It's saying that 100% of people need to support it. Where the money comes from, we don't
Right,
care. You
it's-
guys decide.
That's what I'm like interested here.
So I
With-
just, I see.
With the, there's one thing about the roundabout taking your property out, but there's another thing with, especially when maybe you have a neighborhood that actually could afford to do this, except for some of the people who live there a long time, they bought in earlier, and they're not really wanting to put in $5,000 like for speed bumps. Like this a little, so I feel like we need to clarify this. There's one thing with like getting a pass to put in the street, versus me having to pay like, oh, everyone else is chipping in $5,000 for this. Like, I don't want it. I don't need it. I'm fine. I don't want to pay the $5,000. So what happens in this, we haven't laid out who pays and doesn't pay. Is that true?
That is true. The policy as written today, it expects that homeowner's representative has figured it out. Because we're calling it advanced cash. Let me get that quote right. So we're expecting the money to be secured somehow by this representative, and who is he representing?
Oh, so that like, okay, you're doing this, but since I'm still on this money thing, I'm doing this on my street. I gotta collect the money. We're not adding this, like, we're not taxing the neighborhood as special thing. I gotta go, it's like Girl Scout cookies. I gotta collect the money, then I give it to you.
Give it to Ronnie, please.
I mean, that's
pretty
where it
much,
would.
yeah.
It wouldn't be going on to a water bill or like a special tax to those coming out.
That's why I said there is more to be discussed in terms of how to get this funding. But right now, we're looking at one option, is that the homeowners will come up and their representative will come up with a cost and show us that they do have the money we can move forward to take an agenda to mayor and commission to approve the proposed, because it's going in the right of way, we need to approve it. And they will deliver it based on our technical standards and our right of way permits.
Yes, no question then to this.
Yes,
Has anyone used the opt-in sidewalk program?
yes.
How many?
How many?
I believe one neighborhood, and with the sidewalk, so far, it's been us in-house forces building those sidewalks. So with this program, we do anticipate a contractor hired by the residents.
With your specified plan.
That's right.
Yes.
2 hours, but that's.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Not
just like somebody
road,
building
not
their
each road.
driveway, right? And they go into the right of way.
And inspected by us.
Like-
So we inspect it,
Some
we approve
road.
it. There's a right of way permit, 50, whatever that fee is a small fee.
So it's worth noting that these streets, we don't have plans to put traffic calming treatments in them at this point. That's why theoretically they would be coming to us. We just don't have plans to do that because
Or because we have plans to do it, but it's number 90 on the list.
Absolutely.
And they want to fast track it.
that's correct. That's absolutely correct.
You go.
So with the sidewalk program, there's no 100% support required to put the sidewalk in, right? They just had to have the money for it, right?
I don't recall, I can check on that. Sorry.
I mean, I guess it's like Lake Mueller specifically is an HOA, so maybe they were able to express support because the HOA as a formal entity voted for it or something, but I mean, to me, 100% just seems like not the thing to require, you know, giving one person the ability to veto to me seems silly. So, you know, I would think if you have a super majority of people wanting it, then you should be able to put it in. The two things that stick out to me is one, you know, I don't think we should be setting up a scenario where neighborhoods can put in traffic calming devices that you all don't think should go there. So it's more like if they want to make a priority out of it because they've got the funding to do it and they want to do it, sure, go ahead and have at it. But like to just be able to put something that y'all don't want to me seems silly. So making sure that that's somehow, that this is written in a way where it's like, it's a moot point if they try to initiate a process for something that you all just don't think should go there. And then similarly, like if they come to you all saying, we want speed tables, and you come back saying, honestly, speed tables don't make sense on the street for whatever reason, so it can be cocaine or whatever else instead. And I would think that that's also, they'd have to decide whether to go with your recommendation or nothing at all. So however that's captured in here to me seems important. I think 65% is fine for both stages. Maybe you can bump it from 65 up a bit more if people feel like it needs to be, but that's still an overwhelming majority. I mean, it's more than we see for most things in democratic processes.
Well, except for on that, I think you're still speaking, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, Commissioner.
And then I think the only thing I wanted to actually clarify, I'm probably done for today, is when we say property owners, it's like one person, one vote, right? So you don't get like 3 votes if you own 3 properties.
Yes, you do.
You
You pay
do.
taxes on 3 properties, same here.
Okay, so when we say 65% of property owners,
Every
if
property.
someone owns more than one property, we're counting them more than once as part of the
Because
65%.
it goes with that property, it does.
Okay. I also don't think that makes sense, but, I mean, people can own, if we're replacing homeowners with property owners, people can own vacant lots on the street.
That's what,
Or-
well, it's property owner.
Or multiple lots that are a commercial strip or something, and then,
That's the way the ownership is set up.
I understand that's the way ownership is set up, but if we're setting a policy where we're trying to decide how to count votes, I would think we would go one person can vote, not one lot, one vote. That's my suggestion.
I intend to go with the property there as well myself, but that could come up again. But again, I'm just harping on this from my, like, is it clear? Because it's still not clear to me here. I don't want to create, let's put this, I don't want to create any situation where I'm not part of that 65% and I don't want to pay $5,000. So I don't want I want to make sure that's in there, and that's really clear.
It is, because the 65, how I'm reading it is 65%
Yeah,
to initiate.
yeah.
And then the solution comes forward and some of those 65% go, I don't like this solution, I'm out.
Yeah.
Or the solution and the way staff shares the ideas, they could end up with a solution choice that gains 100%. But I think 100% is needed for the money part, because you can't assess somebody who's not willing. You can't force that on them. Because no, we're not setting up a tax or fee, or that's another whole legal issue there. But I think that the chances of this happening with that threshold, that I think it should, for the 100% to pay and 100% to agree, have to match.
The 100% number came due to the fact that we didn't want someone to get charged if they didn't agree with
That's
the
right.
treatment that was gonna, it's,
The solution.
you know, I guess the HOA can really do whatever they want. However, we just didn't want to be complicit to saying, all right, we're gonna let you do this, and you're gonna get charged indirectly by the HOA. Or if you had I won't even go into the financing part of it. We recommend money up front. Like, no financing of it. We recommend no special assessments, just the money up front.
To approve it, for it to be, and that's how that's written up here.
Right now, yes.
I agree with that.
So we have two scenarios here. We have one that's an HOA and one that's not. So the way I'm reading this is that are you saying that if the HOA says they want to do it, that counts as 100% by virtue of it being the will of the HOA? Or are we still getting a signature from every resident on the street,
It's the
every property on the street?
impact area, so it is actually a block or maybe a couple blocks on the same stretch of roadway. It is not the entire HOA unless, again, when we talk about finance, that's the homeowners, the property owner's representative is expected to walk to us or come to us and once get 65% of the impacted property owners, not the HOA, the impacted property owners. This could be within an HOA. It could be the HOA's representative as well. But this is the property owners on that specific street. Now the HOA could say, we are funding this. You property owners don't have to fund it directly. We're funding this through the fee that we're collecting from everyone. That's their call. They vote on it. They have a legal, body that established through the laws. So they can speak on that legal body. When there is no HOA, that's when it becomes, it is on those property owners and their representative coming to us and showing us that they do have the funding. And if they have 100% is what we wanted to see, 65%, I think it's also doable. And let's just say somebody who doesn't want this speed table, just assume a speed table, they're still not paying for it. They're objecting to it. And I think that's when we see safety ahead of one person's, desire of not having a speed table. It's not impacting their taxes. It's not impacting, greatly. It might be over the whole county, right? We have ongoing maintenance. So that's the only impact they have.
So there's a street segment where I live on, no HOA. There are 2 speed tables on there, let's just say there. We come in, we don't get into the, we can't get one for the county money, we're too far down. They get 65% of the people there. Now for the funding, what it says here, 100% towards the funding of the project. So unless they get, is that 100%? I mean, can I agree to the project as long as the rest of you pay for it? I mean, I'm not chipping in.
Yes, that's
the
the idea, is that we're not tracking if everybody paying their fair share. That's on the group, or is it the residents, and on the representative. That's how it's written right now. And we're saying 100%, they just need to give us consent.
Yeah.
Now, this number, again, it's up for discussion. We come up with 100 and we want to see where you guys at. So I'm hearing 65, maybe if there's a couple of people who feel comfortable and generous to pay for the entire thing. And they're all happy and, you know, it's nice to have 100%. If there's, you guys agree that 65 is enough, if there is money, you know, from the 65% and doesn't impact the rest of you who are not, you know, with this expense, that's doable.
I think from like a reading it clearly standpoint, it would make sense to me to separate the reference to funding to the reference, from the reference to support. So you're,
Yeah,
we're seeking X percent of people to support, whatever we decide on. And then there's a separate thing that says funding from the group has to be given to PPW upfront before implementation. And that's just like its own separate issue for them to work out, whether it's one very wealthy person on the street or everybody pitching in the exact same amount.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
that's a.
And so then what
separate-
our concern is do enough people on the street support it? And I'll go back to, I mean, 100% is super high, like no HOA functions with being 100% consensus to get something done, they function at 50% plus one. Which is the same way most things in democracy work, but even things that are higher threshold, like 2/3 majority or something, they're never, it's so rare to have 100%. And especially thinking it through, if we're going with property owners, you can have someone who's not even living in the state, who could somehow veto this, even just by virtue of not responding, you know, they own a vacant lot or something, I mean, yeah, I really think that 100% support is way too high. I mean, 65% is sufficient, if you all feel passionate, it should be higher, sure, but yeah, 100% to me just doesn't seem like it, we might as well not have the policy, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
And from the attorney, and from the attorney's perspective, I just want to make sure that there's nothing in here that could force my neighbors to make me pay that $5,000. Okay,
So I'll tell you that we're gonna be working with John Hawkins a lot on this, and he couldn't be here today. So I will absolutely talk to him about those concerns. And then my hope is that he'll be able to join us at the next LRC meeting to just provide some guidance, since he's working with CPW.
All right, stay tuned.
yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, I think they're clearly designated separate. And I also think that just because somebody has money doesn't mean that they get to have their way. So just because somebody might have money to pay for it, it gets rammed down somebody's front yard to have a roundabout when they don't know. That's my opinion.
I definitely agree with that, I think that's why you need a super majority of support, right?
100%.
Are we good with 65 on C?
But it sounds like
At this
we're
point?
waiting for the attorney's input for some of these as well.
No problem.
and perhaps with the Commissioner Poole's concern and Commissioner Wright's concern, there are certain, I wonder if there's any, like there are certain instances with the roundabout in particular that might have a bigger impact than a speed bump, and would there be any, if there was an impact on a person's, if the device went into a person's right of way, you know, property, if that would change the situation some. It seems to me like it would change the situation some.
Yeah, and that's what I was referencing to the list of solutions that staff
Right,
is giving the thumbs up to.
right,
Some of those options aren't gonna get the threshold, whatever the threshold is. Some can meet the threshold of acceptance of the affected adjacent property owners. And some options wouldn't meet the threshold, but the options are all aimed at the traffic calming.
right.
So for us, you know, to try to pinpoint, this is, I think, should be loose enough to apply to whoever's coming forward. And I do agree, Jesse, that this is slim chance of happening, no matter what the numbers are. I just think, that we're doing it as an option, but that doesn't mean it's an easy option, even with numbers and thresholds changed because of the money involved. But there could be a lot of rich neighborhoods that I'm out of touch with in that respect.
Commissioner Poole.
Final two things from me for today. One is, can we get a copy of the sidewalk policy sent to us with just so we can kind of have the two to compare? And then the other is, I'll use an example of a neighborhood that I have no idea if they're actually gonna wanna do this, but Westwood Hills, which used to be part of District 6, now it's part of 5, it's off Mitchell Bridge. They really want traffic calming in their neighborhood. They have even specifically talked to me, past people who were involved in their HOA board member, about wanting to pool money to pay for traffic calming. TPW's gone out there, has assessed different areas, some would qualify for traffic calming, some would not. But even the ones that would, they're not ranking super high on their list. So, I mean, what we're really talking about here is this is something that our Transportation Public Works Department, because if the prerequisite here, assuming everyone agrees with my earlier conversation with you all about making sure that you all have to think it's a good idea, the public safety measure that our staff thinks should eventually be there. And then we have the reality of like our tax dollars in a given year only go so far. I mean, there's an equity question about whether we want to let some neighborhood be able to fast track themselves. But ultimately, if what they're doing is paying to put it in their neighborhood, and we would want to do that eventually anyway. I mean, it's arguably like freeing up money from the public dollars to go elsewhere. But I mean, it's essentially us getting neighborhoods that can afford to pay more are shortening the list for us of things that we have to pay for with public tax dollars. And in that way, again, if it's something that our staff thinks should be there anyway, eventually. Our staff isn't looking for 100% support on the roadway to put in stuff that comes through our policy, right? They're just putting it in because that's what the data says should happen because of safety. So I would think that similarly in this case, like, you know, people fast tracking it's really just about if they can get the money, and if they can get the money to do it, which I think is unlikely in most cases, but like Westwood Hills is a big neighborhood. And if the hundreds of properties in that neighborhood want to pull together a couple $100 each to put in, you know, whatever minor thing that TPW thinks makes sense, like, I don't see why we'd want to get in the way of that. And I also don't see why we'd want to let like a out-of-state property owner be able to veto the whole thing. Yeah.
And my final questions, like information for next time are one, I know you guys don't want to do this, tell me this, but a speak on table, whatever you're putting in, at this point in 2024, on an average street, what are we talking about? Just even so that it's like, I would just like to have some estimate if we're talking about 20,000 versus 80,000.
No, it's in the 20, less than 20.
Okay, and then the second thing is, in this process, the amount of staff time that would be involved in terms of what Commissioner Hull was bringing up in equity. I just am curious, approximate, again, looking at this.
There is staff time involved in the initiation, involved in the verification of the consent, and also the review. The only time we are receiving any monetary value is when the contractor hired by the representatives, the homeowner, the property owner representative, is pulled from our department, and that's in the $100 kind of range. It's 150,
Something like that,
yeah,
yes.
it's really very minimal. So that's the impact to staff. So there is impact.
But is that impact like 5 hours or a week? Then we don't need the next, just think about it.
It all depends on the size, but yes, this is more in hours, not in days overall. I would say 8 hours, it would be fair to say, over the life of the project from initiation until the design has been approved. Now, the construction, that's another time. I'm not gonna gauge it because there is monetary value that we receive as part of that right-of-way permit.
And it does vary depending upon the
Neighborhood, contractor, so there's a lot of things that are in play. So it may take more than the right-of-way inspector to be out there. It may take the pavement inspection staff to be out there, somebody from traffic engineering office to be out there. So there is more time that usually not tracked. Given this is new, I do expect more hours to start, and then later on, once we establish a flow and kind of familiar with this, it would be less.
And also, isn't there a reality on the repaving, once speed tables and speed humps have been installed, it changes the ability for the repaving, it makes it more complicated, more
Sure,
expensive.
it's, there's the life cycle, so a speed table would live usually as long as the road would live. If the road was paved recently, but if the road was paved, a long time ago and the PCI numbers are low, we may come back to, and this would be part of the agenda to Mayor and Commission to let you know, this is the conditions of the road. This is when we expect the road to be paved, and we're adding this facility to it, and it's only gonna serve for 5 years. We have the option of either taking this, speed table out and reinstall it at the tax dollars
Yeah.
cost, or the neighborhood could wait
Wait for
until we
it
pave
to
the road.
be repaved, then put it in, but then the next time it needs
It's
repaved,
Right,
it's
still.
It's
it's the
ours.
tax dollars.
But at least it lived all its, expected life. And
Mhm.
these are residential streets, so we're thinking 30 years, 25 to 30 years. So we want to get that much life out of those privately funded.
But that's safe years gained. I mean, yeah,
Yes,
you're gaining the safety during those years that it rolls back to, the
But-
ones in my neighborhood are being patched.
Yeah.
They're 24 years old and we're patching the top of the speed humps. You got,
Yeah.
the royal we ask
Right.
you do.
yes.
And I assume in this, somewhere in there, there's a question of, we would be getting the information.
Yeah.
We would be getting the information about whether or not, this is on the long list. Or this is like,
Tax and issues
like
in
we
the
would
agenda,
not be
yes.
putting this on here at all. So, this is not something that we're saving from tier 3, 14, whatever. We just would never do this.
Well, they would still have to meet the minimum qualifications.
Yeah.
So it would be something that we would recommend
Yeah,
when
Yeah.
that funding is available.
yeah, it still has to be.
But in terms of long-term, I mean, I guess I'm just thinking that through in terms of the long-term costs. That's just something I'm thinking about out loud.
Yeah, and safety gate.
And say, if there isn't any, like, it's just,
Yeah.
I guess it's making people feel safer. Okay, good. Are we good?
Motion to adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
God.
Excellent.